Okay, well, welcome to the webinar. So I'm going to take you through lots of different slides, charts, graphs, data, and so on. And you may wonder where all the information has come from. Well, the answer is various places: freedom of information requests, CalMac's own data, lots of public sources, and also help and advice from experts in Scotland and abroad, naval architects and so on. So if anyone is interested in finding out more about the subject and seeing the base data for everything we're saying here, please do get in touch, drop me an email, and I'll very happily share it all with you. So first of all, we need to identify what our problems are. We're not interested in this catamaran because we like the look of it, or it's a fancy shape. We're interested in it because it addresses known problems. We need to identify and quantify our problems, and then we can see how well the potential solutions address them. So our first problem, and in some senses the biggest problem, is that we can't travel when we want to because there isn't enough vehicle capacity. This chart shows you every sailing for an entire summer of 2019 on the Oban-Craignure route run by the MV Isle of Mull, and you can see that 49% of sailings are 80% or more filled to the notional maximum of 65 cars. So it rarely will fill to its notional maximum of 65 because cars have got bigger over the years. The data only records of a car and not how long it is, how wide it is, and so on. So there's a lot of variation, particularly in an older ferry like the Isle of Mull. Very rarely will it be filled to its sort of notional maximum. So at around about 80% full, the car deck in most instances can't get much more on it. So 80% and above is a full level, and you can see that for half the time it is full and we can't get on. But this isn't a unique story. This happens across the network, but Oban-Craignure is the worst. When you look at the stats, Oban-Craignure is the most congested ferry route in the whole CalMac network. So we can't travel when we want to, and it's a major problem. The second significant problem, and it's related to the first, is of course that the ferries are getting older. The fleet is getting older and older. Now this is a chronic problem. This chart shows you 20 years of vessel replacement, the red line being the average fleet age of the CalMac fleet over that time, and how it has progressively risen. We're up to about an average of 25 years old across the fleet. Some are of course a little younger, but and many are a lot older, our ferry included. The red lines there are the dates of introduction of major vessels. That's the biggest vessels where the crew live aboard. The red line also takes into account the minor vessels, of which there are many. But the picture is the same. Vessels are not being replaced quickly enough, and it's a chronic problem. It's been going on across multiple governments. And it leads to increased costs of running the vessels, more breakdowns, worse reliability, and vessels that are ill-matched to their routes often. The nature of the carryings change, vessels get moved from one route to another, they're sort of cascaded when a new vessel is introduced, and often you find vessels operating a route for which they weren't designed and for which they are not well suited. And this aging fleet problem is a contributor to the next major issue that users see, which is a decline in reliability through the winter months. So our services are getting much more vulnerable to high winds. When high winds occur, the ferry cancels more easily. Now, this has been a perception of people for a long time, but when looking at the data over that same 20-year period backs it up, and you can see that last winter, in fact, across the network, the red line there, we had the worst winter ever in terms of reliability. More than 8% of all sailings across the CalMac network were cancelled in the winter as a result of high wind, poor weather. One of the explanations for this trend is that perhaps, well, the weather might be getting worse. In terms of windiness, as it were, and the severity of the wind and the duration of those strong winds, the short answer is certainly in relation, insofar as Oban-Craignure is concerned, no, it's not. These bars here show you the wind index. That's a measure that's summarizing the prevalence and the strength of winds in each winter. And as you can see, you know, winters in the past, in the early 2000s, that were quite severe relative to winters we see now, the cancellation response was nothing like as high. So when you get those severe winters, nowadays it seems that results in a lot of cancellations, more than 10% back in 2014-15, in that stormy winter. Earlier, those similarly windy winters would not have resulted in such a high number of cancellations. So, next big problem. Our ferries and our ferry system is too expensive to run. So this chart shows you the operating subsidy to CalMac, adjusted for inflation, over the last 20 years. And you can see it's been steadily rising. So it's topped out at just over £140 million a year. So there are two sides to this. Of course, there's well, what's been happening to income, but there's also expenditure. So over this period, you know, the sort of second third of this period, we've had RET introduced. So obviously, you know, more people are being carried, and the fare revenue from those passengers has gone down pro rata because of RET. But our costs are still going up, and those costs, the subsidy was rising before RET, and it's now got to the state where it's leveled off at £140 million a year, which, to put it in context, is more than the education budget of both Argyll and Bute and the Western Isles combined. So we are spending more on the operating subsidy for CalMac than we are on educating our kids. So whilst RET is a great thing, it does put greater pressure on the need to reduce costs and make sure the ferries are as efficient as possible. These rising subsidies are not the fault of RET. They are more to do with the declining efficiency and productivity of the ferry system. So what is the key driver of efficiency and of your costs, those underlying costs? The key thing is vessel design, of course. It's about how much of the ferry costs to crew, how much it costs to fuel, and all the other associated costs, and of course how much it costs to buy in the beginning. So here are 4 examples of different sort of ferry options, if you like. Over on the left is a typical catamaran of the type that we're considering here. Also a Norwegian bidirectional ferry. This example is a zero-emission hybrid battery electric ferry. Set aside the Finlagan, which is one of the more recent additions to the CalMac fleet back in 2011, and then on the end there, Hull's 801 and 802, which are the two which are in construction still on the Clyde. Look at the bottom line. That's the key issue here. Both the catamaran and the Norwegian example are vastly cheaper to own and run than either the Finlagan and most certainly 801, 802. Both of those two vessels are going to cost £250 million over their lifetime at 2020 prices. So this has a significant impact on the service, in that if we want any kind of minor improvement, any kind of marginal increase to operating hours, as we have been campaigning for on Mull for a long time, we've wanted to add 2 extra hours to the sailing day, and that becomes incredibly expensive when the ferries themselves are so expensive to fuel and so expensive to crew. So we wanted those 2 extra hours a day to improve our timetable, and it came with a price tag of about £500,000 a year, which is, as you can imagine, is very difficult to justify at government level when they're thinking of how they're going to spend their money. So the problem is the cost of running the service, the cost of running our ferries, quite clearly, when there are far cheaper options. The next big problem that all the previous ones lead on to is that user needs are not being met. So this graph is an extract from our user survey of last year. We surveyed 700 people on Mull and Iona to get a really good snapshot of people's view of our service. And the first thing to point out here is that Oban-Craignure, as you can see, has got a far worse satisfaction rating in terms of its reliability and its general satisfaction, and also the timetable that it offers is far worse than our 3 minor vessel routes that go to the mainland and between our 2 islands. So why is it that one particular service is ranked so poorly? Well, the biggest issue, as we'll see, is reliability. Oban-Craignure has become far less reliable. As we saw higher up the presentation, the data shows you that, and people recognize that. Their perception is 82% of people perceive the service to be getting less reliable. They know it's getting less reliable. They're having much more difficulty traveling in the winter when they want to. So that's the big issue for the Oban-Craignure route, and why it is singled out amongst them all is that it's all about reliability. It's becoming much more fragile in the winter. So we also have the general problem of our timetable aspirations not being met. So a ferry that is expensive to run means it's expensive to add on extra services at the beginning and the end of the day. So we want things like, we want a longer sailing day in the weekday and at the weekend. And we want increased frequency. We want better connections with public transport. And all of these things are difficult to achieve when the ferry that we're reliant upon is so expensive to run. So therefore, when you ask people how they would like to rank the sort of core aspects of the ferry service, again, reliability is the number one, as you can see there. The top priority for everybody is that the ferry should sail when you expect it to, and that we can travel when we want to. That is the key attribute of a ferry, is that it should get you to the other side of the water when you want it to. Alongside the obvious things such as having sufficient space, that's sufficient car space on the car deck, that fares should be affordable. Well, we're lucky that fares are pretty much affordable now, but there is the worry that with continuing high levels of subsidy and in the ferry service, that those affordable fares might one day be threatened by the continuing need for such high levels of subsidy. And we also want high frequency. Those are our 4 most important priorities. It drops down considerably, as you can see there, when it comes to things, the 2 least important aspects of the service, which are crossing time. People are more concerned about how frequently the ferry travels than the actual speed of the crossing, certainly for a route of our length, and also onboard facilities, whether you can buy things in a shop, whether you can eat a hot meal on board. That's the least important aspect of the service. Most important thing is that it offers a reliable and a frequent service to everybody, as you might expect. So those are all the key problems that we find with our service, and they're all based in vessel design choices. They all have their root in the choices that are made for the ferries that operate the route. So the possible solutions and what a catamaran as a possible solution could do for us. So the first thing is vehicle space. We don't have enough vehicle capacity. Well, the simple, obvious solution is to see if we can get more vehicles on the same ferries. So here's a comparison between the Argyll and the Bute on the left there. The ferries that serve Bute, they're 72 meters long, and you can get 60 cars on them when they're full. A catamaran of pretty much exactly the same length will fit 1/3 more cars on it. So there we are. It's wider. It's got a bigger car deck. We can get more vehicles on it. It's a very simple, straightforward solution to the problem, and pretty obvious too. It's a feature of catamarans, of course, at every length. When you could consider a catamaran of any length next to a monohull of the same length, the catamaran will always carry more vehicles. As you can see, there's a comparison here between CalMax vessels and typical catamaran capacities. And particularly a catamaran can offer this extra capacity without having to do things like put in movable hydraulic mezzanines as you do on a monohull, raising and lowering cars up into the ceiling of the car deck. You know, those sorts of expensive mechanical solutions to the problem of trying to add capacity are not needed, as well as saving costs. That also saves on turnaround time, which is key on a high frequency ferry service like our own. So that's one of the reasons why catamarans are cheaper to build. Alf's gone through many of the other reasons why they're cheaper to build, because of their simple design. And so we're adding there to our list of solutions. The next problem that we need to address is this running cost problem. So the running cost is comprised of two main factors. That's fuel and crew. So looking at crewing, first of all, here's the MV Isle of Mull, and her crew is 31 in the summer, 27 in the winter, and to operate full time, she needs 2.2 crews approximately, which over the course of the year costs just over £3 million. So the main driver, obviously, there is the number of crew. Obviously, there's a debate over whether the crew should be based on the ferry or not. We'll put that to one side for the moment. The thing to focus on, first of all, is the number of crew that are needed to operate the ferry. Has a huge bearing on the cost of running the ferry. So the main driver of the crew number, of the required crew count on the ferry, is the passenger capacity, or specifically the passenger certification. So the MCA will they will determine the minimum safe crewing levels at a particular passenger carrying limit. And that's all about how many crew you need to operate lifeboats, to fight fires, to keep people safe if the ferry were loaded to its safe maximum, which in the case of the Isle of Mull is 962, and it reduces to just over 500 in the winter. And but what you can see there is that the passenger carryings, all those little blue lines, each one representing a sailing, the passenger carryings are far less than the certified maximum. So we're carrying a huge additional cost in terms of additional crew, additional steel and space on that ferry that is just not being used. It's not being utilized. And this is a problem that's replicated right across the network. So, you know, whilst we have not enough vehicle capacity as a universal problem across the network, it's conversely a universal problem across the network that there is far too much passenger capacity, and that is adding to the cost of running the service. So to illustrate what is possible, we can look at the Alfred, which is the catamaran that Alf has talked about running across the Pentland Firth of the Orkneys, operating to the same set of MCA rules as the Isle of Mull, and of course of every CalMac ferry. She carries more cars than the Isle of Mull. She carries fewer passengers, but is arguably a passenger count that's more suited to our kind of route. And she has a crew of just 13, and consequently a crewing cost that's around 1/3 that of the Isle of Mull. So here's a ferry, it's offering the same kind of utility in terms of cars carried, passengers carried, and it's doing it within the safe limits dictated by the MCA, but it's doing it in terms of crew cost at 1/3 the cost of our very heavily crewed MV Isle of Mull. Of course, what that buys you is not the ability to, just get rid of crew, as it were. These are all good, well-paid jobs, and we want to preserve them. But what that enables you to do is to offer far more services with the same number of crew. So this is about not reducing the crewing total in the network. This is about reducing the number of crew on each ferry, and therefore enabling yourself to do more with that same crew, to run more ferries, to run more services, to get a better service for the same crewing cost. So with lower crewing costs come more services. So the next big problem is that our ferries burn too much fuel. So across the fleet, all of those CalMac ferries burn a total of 47 million litres of fuel per year. That costs about £20 million a year. And in terms of carbon emissions, that's equivalent to just short of 70,000 cars. So this is coming at not just a big commercial, economic cost, but a massive environmental cost. So how do we fix that? Well, the key driver of fuel consumption is hull efficiency. We need to find hull forms that are easier to push through the water, basically. The hull design is critical in determining how much energy you need and how much fuel you'll consume. So if we go back to the table I showed you previously, look at the fuel consumption line there, vastly lower for the Catamaran, which has a much more efficient hull form, burns less fuel. And so even though it's conventionally fueled, it still burns marine diesel. It's burning 1/3 of the quantity of the Finlaggan, for example. You don't need to go into expensive sort of dual fuel solutions as has been done with 801, 802. You need to start with an efficient hull design. It's pointless and it's futile to try and green shipping, which is what we must do. It's urgent that shipping reduces its carbon emissions, but it's going to be impossible to do that unless you first start with efficient hull forms, efficient designs that require less energy to push them along. And that gives you not only a big financial advantage in terms of running costs and fuel consumption, but a huge environmental gain in terms of reduced carbon emissions. So the next big problem, this vulnerability to wind, the number of cancellations we get in the winter. Well, the Catamaran has a big advantage there as well. There you can see the silhouette of our prospective new Catamaran laid alongside the Isle of Mull, and obviously it's smaller, it's lower in the water, it offers far less windage, it has less top hamper that is vulnerable to side winds on berthing. So sailings predominantly cancel not because of sea state, but because of high winds on berthing and the difficulty of controlling these tall slab-sided vessels at slow speeds when berthing and trying to berth it in a controlled manner. So a catamaran will be far less impacted by winds because it offers far less sort of sail area to the wind. Not only that, but you've got widely separated propellers that give you high turning torque, and as every sailor will know, maneuvering a catamaran at slow speed, because you have dual control over those two propellers, can alter their speed and direction independently. You've got a lot of power available to maneuver and turn the vessel as you need to. which is really what our masters need. They need controllability in berthing to make their job easier and to reduce these cancellations that we're suffering from. So the next big problem we have is that our ferries don't fit our piers, which seems ridiculous, but it's true. Even our own Isle of Mull is too big for Craignure Pier. So here is Craignure Pier alongside in green the Isle of Mull and other CalMac vessels. You know, the Isle of Mull is too long to berth overnight on Craignure Pier reliably. And that's one of the major problems with her, is that you know, our current pier and ferry combination don't allow us to operate an island focused service. That's a service where the timetable can benefit from the ferry being based on the island and not having to retreat to a mainland port every night. And we can build a much better timetable if we could do that, so that the first sailing of the day left the island, the last sailing of the day returned to the island. But we can't do that because our ferry is too big for our pier. And none of the other vessels in the fleet, save for the Kursk, which has been brought here in recent years, are short enough to berth safely on Craignure Pier. Now, this is a problem that's experienced across the network with other piers, where each subsequent generation of ferry that's got longer and longer has meant that the pier has to be extended and extended again. And we have that option, of course. Well, why not extend the pier to allow these longer vessels to berth? Well, there's the question of value for money. Is that a good value for money investment in a structure that's aging and is nearing replacement time anyway? So you have to ask yourself, well, is this a pier problem or is it a ferry problem? And surely, you know, a better solution would be to get a ferry that would actually fit the pier, which is what this catamaran could do. So I've added in there in light blue at the bottom our potential catamaran, well within the 75-meter limit for berthing at Craignure Pier. And immediately, the first and immediate benefit of this ferry is that we could have our island-focused, island-based timetable without any need for spending on the pier, without the millions of pounds that would otherwise be needed to enable it by lengthening the pier. So our final problem is aging fleet problem. So obviously the only solution to this is a faster pace of ferry replacement, and a faster pace of ferry replacement would be affordable if those ferries were cheaper to buy in the first place. So, you know, that's what makes the case for cheaper ferries, more value for money ferries, is that you can afford to replace them more quickly and renew the fleet. In the interim, there is a potential solution, and it is, of course, you know, buy whatever you can find on the second-hand market if it's suitable. And that's exactly what Scottish Government have set out to do in recent years. They have tasked CMAL, the vessel owning company, with searching the second-hand market worldwide for ferries that could be bought that would be suitable to operate on the route and could be added quickly and cost effectively to the fleet. So far, they haven't managed to find anything suitable. But over the summer, we believe that we have. And this is it. It's a catamaran, of course. It's being built in Indonesia for a customer who now wants to delay their purchase to a later build slot, if possible. So it's being offered on the open market to see if there's an alternative customer out there. It's nearing completion. It should be launched in the early part of next year. So decisions have to be made now before it possibly is lost and the opportunity is lost. But there it is. That's it, under construction in Indonesia. All its main particulars, and here are the key drawings of the ferry. All of its main particulars are suitable. It's not too long. It's just over 71 meters. It has a draft of 2.4 meters and a car capacity of 80. So, and its passenger capacity is about right. It would benefit from having a slightly larger passenger capacity, but that can be addressed. I'll show you in a moment. But in terms of its key attributes, it's a good fit for the service. And it's being offered for sale at just over £9.5 million in its currently designed state. So it seems to be very good value for money. Now I'll just take you through a couple of slides showing you those drawings in a little bit more detail. So difficult to make out these line drawings, but that's the car deck. I'll take you up through the decks, the passenger accommodation to one side and a mezzanine car deck to the other. As you can see, it's open through the length of the vessel, so it can carry dangerous goods, no problem. It will need some modification to suit CalMac's operational needs, and the key ones being addition of crew cabins. Now there's a perfect space for that on that mezzanine car deck, which could be sacrificed in order to make the crew cabins. You lose a little bit of car carrying capacity, but not very much. It needs a lift added, and significantly it needs another passenger deck added behind the bridge, which would not only increase its passenger capacity, but would also enable it to line up with the passenger access systems in Oban-Craignure and in fact every other port in the network. The other key thing it needs to do, of course, is to line up with our link spans, and that's easily achieved by adding twin ramps at each end. So rather than having one central ramp, you have two ramps to port and starboard, and regardless of the orientation of the vessel, whether it's bow in or stern in, whether it's starboard side to or port side to, the inboard ramp will line up with the existing link spans. The existing link spans, the older ones particularly, were designed for vessels of 14-meter beam. So using that geometry, twin ramps that are centered 7 meters off the fender face like this would fit with every link span, every pier in the entire network. So it can be used everywhere without restriction in terms of its fit with piers and link spans. So here is our final list of these full solutions and the key one, which I'll finish with on the right there, is our island focused timetable and all the advantages that can get us. By basing the ferry on the island, we would be able, for the first time, be able to get the 9 o'clock train that leaves Oban every day of the week, which is a simple public transport connection that we ought to be able to make, but we can't at the moment, just because of where the ferry is based. So just by moving where the ferry starts its day, it makes a massive improvement to public transport connections. So we get an earlier start to the day. We can leave the island earlier, and we can return later. So we'd have a 6 o'clock return every day. That basically gives you a much longer day on the mainland with more time to go about your business and more time to travel to get to where you want to and return again in the same day. It's more convenient in every respect. Those 4 extra hours on the mainland give you so many more options and so much more flexibility, whether you're driving a car or whether you're getting public transport. That improves the weekday timetable and gives us many more options for the weekend as well. So it would really transform our service just by the simple act of changing where the ferry starts and ends its day. So what are the catches? Well, no vessel is perfect. There are compromises to be bought with every ferry choice, and there are compromises with this vessel. But there are also those fallacies that Alf was talking about, those perceived problems that actually aren't really problems at all. The first one being the deadweight issue that Alf talked about in a generality before, but this is the specifics of our route. You can see that the Oban-Craignure route does not need any more deadweight capacity than this ferry can offer. It has a deadweight capacity of 330 tons, but you see each one of those red lines is the weight of a sailing through an entire year, and you can see at no point during the year is that 330-ton limit sort of challenged in any way. And in fact, the Isle of Mull has a capacity of 252 tons, and you know, never is she restricted in terms of deadweight. You know, never do vehicles, except exceptional loads, you know, individual exceptional vehicles, never do vehicles get left behind in Oban because the Isle of Mull has maxed out on her deadweight capacity. So this catamaran has ample capacity in terms of deadweight. The other issue that people perceive as being a problem with catamarans, again, Alf touched on it, you know, on giving the Orkney example, you know, it's supposed that they are not as good in severe sea conditions. And it's true to say that this particular catamaran would not be suitable for regular scheduled service to Barra, or, you know, services across the Minch where the conditions are worst. But she can certainly cope with most major routes in the network. Certainly Oban-Craignure is not a problem at all for this vessel. Other, you know, comparable routes, sort of Ardross to Brodick and Kennecraig to Isla, would be no problem. Col, Tyree, Colonsay are all well within the capability of this vessel, which is built to cope with a mean significant wave height of 4 meters. If you wanted a catamaran that was quite happy dealing with the conditions in the Minch, then the solution is that you get a slightly bigger one. You know, that's the same for a monohull and as a catamaran. So the other catch that is offered sometimes is that, you know, the reduced onboard facilities. But as we saw earlier, onboard facilities are far lower priority than the reliability and the frequency of the service. So with lower crewing, with more efficient crewing on a route that is as short as ours, you know, the onboard services would be more akin to what you get on the Carusk or the Argyll and the Bute, and, you know, it's a sort of a coffee and sandwich type snack bar service rather than a bar and a separate restaurant cafeteria. But really, that's low down people's priorities, and particularly when one considers that the price of those extra onboard facilities, the extra passenger space, the extra crewing, and the extra crew accommodation that you have to build onto the ferry actually compromises your key attribute that people want, which is reliability. So the more you add to the superstructure in terms of passenger space and crew space, the more windage you create, the more vulnerability to winds in slow speed at berthing maneuvers, and therefore those onboard facilities come with a direct price of reduced reliability in the winter. So clearly, a ferry that is focused on reliability and frequency and efficiency is far more important than one that offers a high level of onboard services, certainly for our route. So what are the next steps? How do we go about getting this vessel? Well, the first key step's been achieved in that, you know, government have already set the policy. They've set the objective of buying a second-hand vessel. All we're doing here is bringing forward you know, an answer to that search for a vessel. It's a solution to a policy objective. So government are already looking for this ferry. We're just helping them to find it. And in finding this vessel, you know, its main particulars are suitable for the route. So, you know, we're getting closer. The next major hurdle is the technical and detailed approval that only the MCA can give. So they have to assess this vessel in terms of its compliance with all of the safety regulations that they regulate, that they certify and approve, and only the MCA can decide that. So that's the stage we're at the moment. So CMAL, who are the vessel owning company, are talking to the seller, and they're discussing how any modifications that are needed could be done to satisfy those MCA requirements. Now that's a significant hurdle. The seller is confident of being able to meet those MCA requirements, but it's up to the MCA. They are the final arbiters of this. So it either will or it won't pass the MCA. We're hopeful that it will, but that is the first key technical step that it has to overcome, is satisfying the MCA. Then, of course, it has to satisfy CalMac's operational needs. Key one being somewhere to put crew cabins so that a liverboard crew can operate this vessel. But as I showed you in an earlier slide, that there's a space identified for that, where these cabins that CalMac will require can be added, and other, all the other issues like link span alignment and so on. But those are all modification points that are achievable. They just have a cost. So ultimately, this will come down to a value for money decision at ministerial level. They have to decide whether the purchase price plus the price of the modifications that are needed will still represent value for money. We're hopeful that they will see that it's value for money. Obviously, we're starting at a very low cost vessel. It's less than £10 million to start off with. Again, just to put that in context, the budget, the original contract price for 801 and 802 was nearly £50 million. So this is 1/5 of that. Okay, it is a smaller vessel in terms of both passenger and car capacity, but it's 1/5. We're adding a major vessel with significant capacity and it's flexible, can be used on multiple routes for 1/5 of the contract price of the two vessels that are currently being built on the Clyde. They've obviously gone up in price somewhat, and this will go up in price a little bit too, because it's going to have modifications done, but it will still be a relatively low cost purchase, but it will need a ministerial decision at the end. So the key thing in making sure that we get that ministerial decision is making sure that we have community support, and that's what this webinar is all about. It's the first step in informing and engaging the community so that we can find out whether you're all happy that this is something that we as a ferry committee should pursue. We want to make sure that it does meet your needs. We think it does, and we want to make sure that the community agree with us, and that then we have then got a strong case to go forward to government, to the Transport Minister, and demonstrate not only all of those cost-saving advantages, operational advantages that we've been talking about, but we can demonstrate the real service benefit and the community benefit that it will bring, real benefit to the island. So that's what this is all about. There we are. That's my last slide. I'll leave it on the screen there. So please let us know what you think. Come along to our website, email us, get in touch. We'll be doing other activities as well to get people's feedback. But please don't hesitate to get in touch and let us know what you think about it. Okay, thank you.